We, being white males, the most likely reason we're going to die is a heart attack or a stroke. People are measuring things that are not validated. And why are they doing that? Because they're telling you it's about optimization. They're trying to make a buck. The way that I approach it with my health and people that I'm working with is
a master in nutrition science, an author, and a man that has let his curiosity lead the way, helping people navigate the overwhelming topic of nutrition, gaining great popularity all around the world through his informative, science-backed approach to health and true fulfillment. Our guest today is Simon Hill. For me, I take this approach of nutrition based off feeling a lot of time. Is that a naive approach?
yes and no. I don't think you can just go on intuition and gut feel. That doesn't necessarily reflect your long-term risk of developing an insidious disease like type 2 diabetes or cardiovascular disease or fatty liver disease. And there are objective markers that you could go, things that you could go and measure. So you could. Fitness is seen as someone who is to be idolized, put on the pedestal, they're healthy, they have the six-pack. Sometimes that six-pack is not reflective of the psychological experience that person's going through. Is your eating behavior limiting your capacity to socialize with those people where you can be yourself?
You said before that you're optimizing for your life fulfillment. Is there some key pillars in that fulfillment, and what are the things that you're focusing on?
So firstly,
Simon, welcome to the show.
Chris, great to be here, mate. Thanks for having me.
Mate, what is your thoughts on the booming trend of people posting content online, eating whole foods on chopping boards?
Oh, we're straight into it, right? I guess I have mixed feelings about it. And it depends on who's doing it and the message that they're providing. I'm all for people talking about nutrition online if they're providing good information. So I think you could probably point to someone that has food on a chopping board and is communicating things well, and maybe a lot of people that are perhaps not.
Yeah. And so I guess for me, and what we were saying just before we press record was there's so many different opinions online, differing, and, you know, people lean towards all different avenues. Yours being more on the plant-based side of things. When you're seeing these people posting their chopping boards, most of the time there's a nice big red juicy steak on there and some fruit and stuff. Is there, like, in terms of your belief and the message that you're sharing, when you see their chopping boards with meat all over it, is there any level of nobility or respect for that style of eating, or is there a disbelief that that's like you just don't agree with that approach at all?
It's a bit to break down here.
Yeah.
So personally, I think anyone who is talking about food and their own experience and has made changes to their diet, I think they're to be commended for like taking a proactive step with their health. So I think I have some respect for them in that sense. I think it's confusing for the everyday person because you see one person with the cutting board of meat with, you know, making claims about what it's done to their health and speaking with great conviction. And then you see someone else, you know, talking about the science and perhaps like a Mediterranean style diet that's very plant rich and doesn't have as much meat. And to the everyday person, my kind of feel from talking with the community is that creates a lot of confusion. It looks like there's all of these different views. It looks like science is confused, right? And no one really knows. Is that the general impression you kind of get? Right. And so if you're the person on the receiving end of that, you're scrolling and you see the chopping board of meat, and then you see, you know, the next post is about how meat causes cancer. You put your hands up in the air and go, holy shit, what do I do? And that's not empowering, which is a problem. Because when you don't feel empowered, you're likely just to, you know, not make any change. And it's also probably quite anxiety provoking. So I think that, like we often think about what are the long-term consequences of food choices people are making, but I think we're also overlooking the amount of anxiety that general public is dealing with on a daily basis by being flooded with all of these different views. And I would say to that person listening that the science is not confused. Although it seems like it is, it's easy to fall into this kind of place of false equivalence where we're giving both of these views kind of equal weight, when in fact, often a lot of the stories that we're seeing online about food are anecdotal, and versus, someone who's sharing information from peer-reviewed literature, clinical trials, where we've tested a hypothesis using the scientific method. And so it comes back a little bit to, I guess, scientific literacy for the general public, sort of understanding and being able to spot, what's the strength of that evidence that is behind the claim. And then when you unpack that, then you can start to see, okay, this is why there's different views online, but this is stronger evidence. And so if I'm going to make decisions with my lifestyle that are going to affect my mental health and physical health, this is probably going to be a less risky option for me.
Do you think there's a confusing aspect to it, but do you also think that it can be much more simple than we make it out? In terms of, for me, I look at it and there's so many different things online. And I think you said in another podcast a while ago, it's like people are throwing darts at a dartboard in the dark, and the science is to bring the light. Right. You mentioned something like this. For me, I take the approach of nutrition based off feeling a lot of time. So I like to onboard different people's advice and then track the way I feel from that. So like stick at something for a prolonged period of time, get a gauge on how I'm feeling, how's my energy levels, how's my mental focus, how's the clarity I'm having throughout my days based on the food and the fuel that I'm giving it. And for me, there's a piece of clarity and just peace of mind, understanding that it can be much more simple. Is that a naive approach, or do you think, what are your thoughts on that?
Yes and no. I think it's important, obviously, to be thinking about how you're feeling in your day-to-day and week-to-week, and you want to optimize for that. But that doesn't necessarily reflect your long-term risk of, developing an insidious disease like type 2 diabetes or cardiovascular disease or fatty liver disease. And there are objective markers that things that you could go and measure. So you could adopt a certain diet where you're feeling good, and then you could also go and do some blood work and check things that would indicate whether you're putting yourself at higher risk of one of these diseases that, ultimately that's what is killing most people. Is these cardiometabolic diseases, whether it's various types of cancer or non-alcoholic fatty liver disease or having a heart attack or stroke. So I don't think you can just go on intuition and gut feel. I think you also have to marry that with data that takes away bias, that looks over the long term and sees, what is someone's risk of developing a certain disease when they're eating, dietary pattern A versus dietary pattern B.
Then there's, on top of that, with the data that you get, the markers on your blood work typically are very broad, and they're not there for performance. They're there for the average Joe as well. And because for me, it's like there's so many layers to this. I try and go, okay, I'm going to prioritize my holistic health, and I'm going to work with a health coach that can then analyze my bloods properly. And then you get the blood work and you're reading it and it's all in the green, so it's all fine. And then you speak to some other guy and they go, oh, but that's a green for a normal person. You're trying to perform like an athlete. That's not right for you, and all of this stuff. I just feel like this health thing for me can be complex and overwhelming, and perhaps it is naive, but there is a level of peace for me to be able to go, like, I feel quite good. I'm eating whole foods that, come from the earth. It's all good, I guess. At least I'm not eating processed, and I'm not going in the McDonald's line and ordering that sort of food.
And again, here, this is going to be a nuanced answer or response to what you said, because I actually tend to agree with you that there is over-testing when it comes to blood tests. So there are, again, like, not all blood tests are equal. There are known biomarkers that we know are very good predictors of, say, developing atherosclerosis. Both being males here, we being white males, the most likely reason we're going to die is a heart attack or a stroke. And we know without a shade of doubt that your level of ApoB, traditionally people would measure LDL cholesterol, the field's moving to ApoB, that we know that level determines how much plaque you're laying down in your arteries. And there is a level where you're not laying down plaques. That's something quite easily you could go and measure. So that's just one example of like a very robust, reliable biomarker with a huge swath of peer-reviewed evidence to support it, from animal studies through to large-scale observational studies, randomized controlled trials, and genetic studies. Very different to some of the shady blood testing you see online where the people are measuring things that are not validated. And why are they doing that? Because they're telling you it's about optimization. They're trying to make a buck. So we can't lump all blood tests in the same basket. You know, the way that I approach it with my health and people that I'm working with is, yes, we want to get you feeling good today. We're going to look at the literature and look at what foods and dietary patterns are associating with less risk of these diseases over time, what biomarkers are reliable and valid that we can measure. And we're going to do our best to optimize for all of those so that you're feeling good today. These key biomarkers that we know are predicting risk, they're in range. Forget the distractions, biomarkers that are not validated, that are sexy, even the gut microbiome testing. Like, this is in its infancy. We don't even know how to read or interpret that data yet, right? And I understand it can be sexy, but I try and bring people back to like where we have a bit more robust body of evidence. And then I think within you, typically speaking, not the one diet's not going to be the right diet for everyone, right? But there are variations of a theme. I think there's a pretty well-established theme in the literature, and within that you can kind of vary it or personalize it depending on what your goals are and how you're feeling in your day-to-day. And we can double click on that theme if you want, but that's kind of my overall thesis.
Yeah, and I need to emphasize that I'm definitely no expert in any of this field, but I would like to think that the body's intelligence is quite high, and it does adapt based on what you give it as well. A lot of times, like you look at people that remove dairy from their body for such a prolonged period of time, when they try and drink a glass of milk, they get a bit of an upset stomach. And it's probably the same with a lot of different things. I've been speaking with some people on the show recently, more spiritual, and talking a little bit about new science, you know, and like the intelligence of the body and how much of the mental, the subconscious programming and that intelligence of the body plays a role on the physical body as well. Have you looked into much of that stuff, or are you more so down traditional science routes?
Well, I think traditional science encompasses that, in that like we've known about the placebo effect for a long time. Yeah. The placebo effect is a real effect. You see, that's why you have to have a controlled study, because what is the placebo effect at the end of the day? It's where you're measuring a benefit, but you've actually haven't given that person, they haven't been exposed to the supplement or the medicine or whatever. So what explains it? That person believed they were given something. So that, the placebo effect speaks to psychology and the fact that your thoughts affect your biology. That's the very reason as well why anecdotes online, you need to take them with a grain of salt, because they're not controlled. You don't know if, that person who says they took, supplement X and cured cancer, you don't understand the independent effect of supplement X unless you have put it up against the control. How much of it was their psychology? How much was it with the other variables in their life they changed that we don't know about? So, and I think apple cider vinegar, did you see that Netflix series?
No.
So there's a Netflix series out right now called Apple Cider Vinegar. People should go and watch it. And there's also a documentary of the same story, something about Instagram con artists. And basically it's the story of Mel Gibson. And not to hijack this conversation, I'll keep this short. And you can
go elaborate. Let's do it.
You can throw the questions at me. I've taken over. But this story is really relevant now, because she, in 2014, 15, 16, rose to fame online. And she was putting forward what she ate. And she said she had terminal brain cancer and, from the outside appeared to be healing. She was doing it naturally. She turned down against conventional medicine. And a community of people were following her around the world and believed what she was saying, to the point where there would have been people with cancer who were making decisions about their own cancer treatment based off what she was putting online. She'd fabricated the diagnosis. So again, you see information online about how someone has improved their health. Be very, very have a healthy level of skepticism, because maybe they didn't fabricate their diagnosis, but maybe it was just a misdiagnosis.
Just don't take it as gospel.
Right. So she had essentially built this huge community. Apple had funded like an app called the Whole Pantry and released it on the Apple Watch. Penguin Random House published a book with her, and around the time of all of this, the PR being done to support the app and the book, it came out. An investigative journalist, had been like following the story, and it came out that she had made this up. She had a previous life where she made up that she had an open heart surgery, and so there was all sorts of fabrication. And I think that's a reminder for all of us that, again, back to what I said earlier, like, there's this false equivalence. We cannot equate an anecdote to findings from peer-reviewed literature where you're controlling for bias. And I'm not saying that all anecdotes are like Mel Gibson's. Watch that documentary. I think a lot of anecdotes, so hers was clearly disinformation, where it's deception. She knows what she's doing. But I think a lot of anecdotes online are well-intentioned people who are just unaware of the biases that are at play and the reason we need the scientific method.
You mentioned to have a level of skepticism with things that you see online. For you, obviously, you would have skepticism on a lot of things. Skepticism is probably a reason why you deep dive into something in the first place, to find answers, right?
Right. Like I had someone yesterday ask me what I thought about methylene blue.
Mark Boris on the podcast. I was listening to yours. He asked you about that.
And, honestly, I think I said to him I would need a month to properly review that.
Yeah.
It's not something that you can just go away and Google and read a blog on. I would have to dig through and I'm not familiar with that body of research, but my process would be, okay, there's an evidence hierarchy. At the bottom is anecdote and expert opinion. If I just say something to you right now, Chris, you should try adding the leaf off that plant to your diet, it'll really improve your health, that means nothing. If I can't support that with evidence, that's just my opinion down the bottom of the evidence hierarchy, along with these anecdotes online, along with even case studies. And then the next level above that, you have in vitro studies. So maybe you're testing human cells or animal cells in a petri dish, along with actual animal studies. And then you go a level up. So as we're going up, we're getting more valid, more reliable. You go up, you have observational studies of humans. And even then there's a spectrum. There's cross-sectional. So one point in time, I go and look at a population. That's the weaker form of observational evidence. And then there's prospective, where we look at people over time going forward. And then there's retrospective. That allows us to look at certain exposures, so dietary exposures, be it dairy or be it red meat, and actual health outcomes like having a heart attack or cancer. It's hard to do that in a randomized controlled trial because of how long you need.
Observation studies, do you think those are the ones most people take as gospel?
No, I think there's a lot of the very people that are pushing the anecdotal type of evidence are usually the people that say, observational evidence is flawed, healthy user bias, but they're just completely unaware of the own biases that are at play. There's way more biases to play with your own anecdote. And again, I think some of that comes back to just limitations that we have as humans. We are so prone to so many biases. There's a great book actually called Skeptic's Guide to the Universe by Stephen Novella. Amazing read. That is it. The book is basically about how we think and where our limitations are. And I think you have to be aware of those. And it provides a very strong case for why the scientific method even exists in the first place, to basically help us work past some of these biases that we have as individuals and move closer to some form of or less uncertainty. Above the observationals where you get the clinical trials. So I mentioned before about the placebo effect. Now this allows us to really try and see the independent effect of a certain variable as much as possible, but you have to appreciate they're not going to run for decades. So quite often, instead of feeding people something or getting people to fast, instead of measuring was there a difference in heart attacks or cancer, you're measuring a biomarker that's established. So you might measure, for example, did ApoB or LDL cholesterol, how did it change? Like I mentioned before, that we know predicts risk of that disease. And then you're coming back after looking at the entire body of evidence, going back from the bottom, the in vitro studies, the cell culture, the animal studies, the observational, the different types of observational, the randomized controlled trials, the meta-analyses of randomized controlled trials, and you're looking to see, is the data pointing in the same direction, right? And ultimately, when it is pointing in the same direction, you have more confidence in, whatever kind of question you're trying to ask.
Making sure the data is pointing in the right direction. And then I guess that ties back into that quote around the science is supposed to give you the light, like give you the light, the understanding. You've gone on this massive rabbit hole in your life of unpacking all of this. And I'm just so fascinated. I want to talk about, because even on that front, you're saying about going to the science, the trials don't go forever. But then again, you've got things like the environment's changing so much. There's so much more like construction. There's so much more different things that can probably affect us, and our body has to adapt. Who knows, the body that we're in now might not be the same as what we were hundreds of years ago because of all the different changes in life. There's so many things we can unpack, but I just want to go back to little Simon first and talk about you as a kid. How were you as a kid? Were you healthy? Were you active? And let's go a little bit of a timeline to figure out how you've actually got to where you are today.
Yeah, I was just a regular healthy kid. Grew up between America and Australia. I was born in Melbourne, and we moved over to the States for a little bit. My dad's a professor of physiology. He researches cardiovascular disease and risk factors, and he's involved in that more, I'd say, bench top level science. So looking at cell cultures and deep microscope work. And I have photos from when I was like 4 or 5 wearing his lab coat and in his lab, trying to look through these microscopes and see cells. And my memories growing up are basically my study and podcast room now looks a lot like my living room growing up, and my dad's office is just like littered with scientific papers that are printed out and highlighted and notes. And, it feels a little bit like investigative work. You're trying to piece things together. And I love that. And the joy that I get out of it is that I can hopefully give people some helpful information, but I'm just curious and I'm constantly learning and being able to challenge the positions that I hold. And that's where like science for me is fun. If you have a degree of humility, you're willing to change your views as new data emerges, rather than having if you have a preconceived, like this is just my worldview, that's boring. Like you're never actually looking at the science, with a real degree of curiosity, just trying to make the new science fit your view.
And I guess people don't it doesn't sit nice with them when you change your view as well. So then they try and, some people respect it. Some people just slander it.
Dude, that's an epic point.
And because like, it's a great sign that your opinion has changed on the premise that you discovered your initial opinion with evidence and time and research, because a lot of people are too influenced and they just hop around opinions because they trust someone, they say something, they don't look at it themselves, come to a conclusion, realize it's false, and then they hop ship. But when you're actually spending the time investing into coming up with that opinion, and then you invest more time and come up with a new opinion, I think there's nobility and respect that needs to be garnered for that, because you've gone in the public eye and you've formed a new opinion. But I think a lot of people slander that.
Well, I mean, it's an incredible point that you bring up, because to a layperson, someone who's communicating science that changes their mind can be seen as like a lack of confidence. Well, this person's not that well researched, like they're flip-flopping. And I think it comes back to how that person who's changed their mind, their track record, how they review the evidence, also how they communicate it. So a good example, and I don't want to get too controversial down the COVID kind of side of things, but I think that during COVID, one of the areas the government could have done much better was explain why advice was changing. Because, I had so many friends just saying, oh, the government said this, now they're saying that. And they didn't really come out, I think, and communicate it in a way that was fair to the population, in that they, really explain why the recommendation or advice had changed, and explain to people that that happens with science. As new science is published, like, things are going to change, and it's not that necessarily the government got it wrong and they lied for certain things. Maybe they just did the best with the data they had at the time, and then they got more and decided that they were going to change that recommendation. So, I think it's a green flag if you see a science communicator online, someone that you follow regularly, who is willing to put their hand up and say, I'm changing my view on this, here's why, and presenting that new data. And that's, as much as possible, I'm trying not to just be another voice out there telling people how to eat. I want people to know my thought process, because if I can put my thought, just like the thought process out there, that's what I'd rather people critique. Don't critique whether I tell you to eat cruciferous vegetables or broccoli or plant protein. Like, critique the way that I'm thinking about it. And if it's a solid critique, I'm going to adjust it. And you've just evolved. You've helped me evolve to have a better position. So, yeah, that all started when I was, I guess, 2 or 3 years old.
It's crazy. And then your mum was a nurse as well. So it was all into health and biology, and that's kind of been a massive theme in your whole family, in your whole life, really.
Yeah, my mum had an incredible career as a nurse. My mum and dad actually met in the car park of a hospital.
Wow.
It's very cliche. And that was when my dad was doing his postdoc. And yeah, my mum's kind of specialty was lactation consultancy. She started as a midwife and then became a lactation consultant. So yeah, I kind of grew up, surrounded by this environment where, health and discussion of science was kind of front and center.
So it was front and center. Your parents got a divorce. And one of the things you said, which was really fascinating in another conversation you had, was that you, I guess, having that growing up there, and I'm starting to understand now that obviously your dad was passionate about his work, and there was probably a level of busyness in his life doing a lot of stuff. You never really had time to sit down, open up with family. And so you said going throughout your life, you struggled to kind of lead with an open heart, in a sense, or lead with your heart. Is that something that you kind of found was a challenge or a theme throughout your life?
I think it's still a challenge now.
Yeah.
I think the way that I grew up, through no fault of my parents, is relatively common. Hard discussions weren't really spoken about. We just had this level of positivity in the house and everything will be all right. And so if you grow up in that environment, you're not kind of flexing that skill of sharing how you're feeling. And if you're feeling sad, feeling like, you can share that and you can be vulnerable, and you'll have someone who's there to, hug you or hear you or help give you advice. And so, yeah, I grew up in an environment where it was high energy in terms of work ethic and productivity, and, I guess playing your role in the community, and, being a productive, polite human. But the kind of psychological well-being side of things were somewhat neglected through no one's fault.
So does that just mean that you had to kind of just move on or bottle up things maybe when you were having a challenge, and then so going later on into life, it doesn't come naturally to you?
I'm great at bottling things up, and that's something that, I have to work on as an adult, because that patterning is there. And I can't say that I was conscious of that as a kid. I think it was just the norm. It wasn't that I was consciously thinking, "Oh, I'm feeling sad, I got to bottle this up." I don't recall that. I just felt like this was the normal environment that we're growing up in. And, before you know it, 25 years goes like that. Now I'm sitting here nearly 40 and still very much work in progress.
When you say you need to work on it, why?
Well, I think ultimately
how fortunate are we to take control of our health? We have the opportunity in this world to prioritize our health. And one of the things that I do to prioritize my health is I use this thing that is on my wrist called a Whoop. It's a game changer and it's my best friend when it comes to achieving my health and fitness goals. There's a couple of things that I like to use with the Whoop. So I'm not bombarding you with all of the benefits that this thing on my wrist does, but I like to track my sleep and more importantly, my restorative sleep, my deep and REM sleep. I change different things in my modalities and my routines to improve those numbers, ultimately resulting in me feeling better throughout my days. If you guys want to take control of your health and fitness, you can go to join.whoop.com/Chris and I will give you a free Whoop and a band for 1 month. So you can try out Whoop completely free. And if you do not love it, you can send it back, no dramas, risk free. So go to the link in the description of the show notes below or go to join.whoop.com/Chris and I'm going to give you a free month subscription and a Whoop band completely free. Let's get right back to this episode.
And relationships are a very important part of our health equation and just life fulfillment, right? And so if you can either be kind of naturally good at that. Some people are very naturally good at that. And they probably grew up in an environment that was conducive to kind of just learning those skills, whether it was modeling from their parents or friends. Maybe there's a genetic component to it. And then some of us have to work on it harder. And so like, why work on it? Because it's freaking hard. It will be so much easier for me right now to say to like, whether it's close friends or my partner, like this is just too effing hard. You know, I'd rather just like push it to the side. But the thing is, when you can share openly and you feel comfortable with someone, and that's really a measure of like who are the closest friends in your life. It's like, who can you sit around a table with and be yourself? And I think it just has dawned on me progressively over, decades that if I want to have these like really close relationships that are adding a lot of joy to your life, but also are mutually beneficial, rewarding for the other personal persons, then you need to be able to take off the mask and feel comfortable, sharing with, whatever you're going through with these people in your life that are the closest people, the people that you love. And the data is there to support that. People who have healthier relationships are living healthier and they're living better, living longer. And, loneliness kills. So it's just part of the health equation that I can't ignore.
It makes sense. You mentioned just before that it wasn't your parents' fault. What makes you think that?
Well, I think they were just doing their best with what the modeling and the environment there. These patterns just flow through until someone realizes that, okay, this automatic pattern that I have, maybe this served as like a good defense strategy when I was a kid, but it's not serving me right now. And it's not going to serve me when I have kids. So like you have to get to a point where you are able to increase your awareness on something like that. And, I'm privileged. Like my parents worked really hard. I had great opportunity. I've, by all measures been very successful commercially. And so I've got this place of privilege where now I have, more time to reflect on things. And like my parents, they were in a different position to me. They're struggling to make ends meet and trying to like, do their best. So I don't think it would be fair for me to blame them.
Yeah, for sure. I would agree with that too. And I guess like there's no value in blaming them anyway, because it's in the past. And it's like you can't actually control that at all. I think when I look at even my life, for example, you only judge something based on the information that you know about your life. And so when you're younger, you haven't experienced as much. You don't have as many comparison points. And it's kind of just is. You said earlier, it's like, that was just my life, right? And so you don't think about it. It's like, you're not going there, I am bottling this up right now. Like, it's only in hindsight and reflection where we find out those things. Would you say that you're quite a self-reflective person?
I think I've become more self-reflective. over time. Again, I think that's a skill. It's something that, or at least for me, I've had to kind of flex and work on, like working out in the gym, carving out the time to reflect and just carving out the time to actually understand what I'm feeling. Because quite frankly, a lot of the time I never even paused to think how I was feeling. And it's very easy in this world to be reactive, to be making decisions without actually checking in. And I just think over the years with more maturity, I've been able to get better at pausing and sort of quietening all the noise and actually, understanding what I'm experiencing on the inside.
In reflection, what would you say some of the main things that were causing a lot of noise were?
I mean, probably just not feeling like you're enough. A lot of it is kind of inadequacy and trying to prove something, whether it's to my parents to get their attention or, to some type of accolade. It's coming from a feeling of a lacking. So, just being able, I mean, even just becoming aware of that is a pretty good starting point.
Not feeling enough. That's probably a pretty common feeling for a lot of people, hey?
I think so. I think we're all dealing with that to some degree.
Yeah. It just makes me think if that's your thought, where do you become enough? Because if you don't feel like you're enough and you set this goal on where you can get to be enough, my thought would be you would get there and you still won't think you're enough.
I agree. I think you have to realize you're enough right now.
Yeah. But then at the same time, if you've made some mistakes and led down a path that maybe you're not proud of, just in a theoretical sense, you're not talking about anyone in this room. It's just more so if you're in that state and there is a lot of work that needs to be done on you, it's like you can't really say you're enough.
But you can have self-love without forgetting the past. You can forgive yourself and not forget it. And this is my view, that you can be enough here today and have self-love and respect while being a work in progress.
Yeah. We said just before we were recording, we were talking about feeling like an imposter. I feel like especially when you get in the public eye as well, and you're potentially a lot of your metrics of success are public as well, there can probably be a level of imposter syndrome as well. Has that been a big thing for you as well?
Yeah, I deal with imposter syndrome daily.
And what do you mean by that?
Feeling like I am not the best person to be, having the conversation, whether it's with you today or whether it's when I'm interviewing people on my show. And just second guessing, or if I'm at an event doing a talk, it's, second guessing yourself. Have you really done enough work to be here? And over the years, I think that voice for me is quietened a little bit. It's still there, and I respect it because it kind of it's motivating. Kind of like the fact it's there.
Where do you think it stems from though? Because the imposter syndrome and that feeling like you're not meant to be here ties very closely to the not being enough feeling as well, right? It's kind of like the same thing. Like I don't feel, in a sense.
I mean, we're going deep here. I just know I have so much more to learn. And that I probably have blind spots, and there are views that I probably have today that may not be right, and they're going to need to evolve. And even though that voice is there, I know that I'm doing the work. I know that I'm doing the work to evolve as best as I can. So even when I do hear that voice of whether it's is someone else would be better at doing this, or are you the best person to be doing this speech today? I do come back to the work. Like I know like I've put in a certain body of work over decades and tried to hold myself very accountable to a set of values and beliefs along the way that have held me in good stead. So, I don't know where that voice comes from.
Yeah.
I don't know the actual root, but I agree with you. It probably is. It is linked in some way to not feeling like you're enough.
Yeah, it's interesting trying to connect the dots. I love that Steve Jobs quote where it's like, you can't connect the dots looking forward, you can only connect them looking backwards. And you're just hearing the story and unpacking all these similarities. You're like saying there's like the feeling of not being enough, the feeling of being an imposter. Then you say, even you said earlier, is like your desk today looks very similar to what your dad's did when you were 4 years old. It's like a really interesting, like connecting these common themes that have led you to where you are today, where when people look at you, it's like you're very successful, you've done all these amazing things, you can hold your own, you can talk with confidence and conviction. But it just goes to show that there's always these little things in everyone that people don't really see.
I think that's part of it. So like if someone comes up to me in a cafe or at the airport and says something, I just hate the idea of being put on a pedestal. I hate it because like if only everyone knew what was going through my mind. And the second questioning that I have, like you say, it's I think it's just part of the human experience. It doesn't matter how successful someone looks on the outside.
Yeah, it's interesting if that pedestal thing then, and we're going deep, but the feeling of not being enough and an imposter, potentially, does that feeling come from you pedestaling other people? Because the only way you can feel like you're not enough is by comparing yourself to other people who are labeled enough, in a sense.
Yes, comparison.
Yeah,
and yeah, I'm sure I'm guilty of that.
Yeah. You, obviously being Australian, you said you were born in Melbourne. When did the decision come to move to the States, and what was your thoughts behind that? Was it a work decision? Was it a reason to take that to the next level?
Do you mean when I was a kid or more recently?
No, like more recently.
Okay, yeah, because that was when I was 2. So
you moved to the States when you were 2.
Yeah, it wasn't a lot of thought behind that move.
No, recently, like
more
recently.
Yeah. So yeah, I've kind of had this connection to the States throughout my life. We moved over when I was 2 until I was 10, and then back to Oz. And more recently, I started my podcast in 2018, and that first episode I actually had started in Los Angeles, recording out of an Airbnb room there, and had no idea what I was doing. Still don't for a lot of things. And so I was interviewing a lot of people in America at the beginning of the show. And my whole shtick is like, how do I get the domain-specific expert for a specific area of nutrition? But more recently, I've gone beyond nutrition, other aspects of science. And how do I, someone from a Stanford or a Harvard or Duke University that's been working on something for 30 or 40 years that has a tremendous body of knowledge, kind of like my dad in his area, and how do I have a conversation with them that the general public benefit from? And my skill set, if you were to actually, if I was to drill down, is probably just built from talking to my dad at the dinner table and not understanding what the hell he was saying and having to get a little bit better at asking him questions and how to explain things, because these people have so much knowledge, but they're used to going to conferences and talking a different language. Yeah. But for me, a lot of these people are in the US. So I started the show over there, and it meant that 50, 60% of my audience was based in America. And so I was always doing trips back and forth, through 2019, a little bit through COVID, and then afterwards. And then I joined a network called Voicing Change. I don't know if you know that. It's a podcast network that's run by Rich Roll. Do you know his show?
Yeah. I looked into it in preparation for this. But
Yeah. So I kind of joined him with 4 or 5 other shows, and that's all based out of LA. And so it made sense to kind of go over for the next few years and spend most of my time in LA and use that as a base to kind of get more guests in person.
Yeah. I see a common theme of curiosity. you would have been, I'd imagine you're quite a curious person to go into such rabbit holes. When you're with your dad, you're like, what are you saying? I want to know. But then even just wanting to speak to these leaders and these people that are saying really complex things at a conference, and your job is to try and unpack them and explain them in a simple manner. There's got to be a level of curiosity that you probably have on a day-to-day, would you say?
I think that's what makes life fun.
Curiosity?
Yeah. I mean, it gives me a spark. It's what gets me out of bed. It's like just being curious. And to the point where when I was a kid, it was probably annoying.
What do you mean?
The amount of questions that I asked about like how things would work. And, I was just fascinated by looking at something which might appear quite simple on the outside and just understanding like what was underneath or, how it came to be. But yeah, certainly that's what drives every single one of my conversations, is to really understand what my guest has gleaned from their work over, in some cases it's 40 years, like Walter Willett, who I interviewed, who was from Harvard, like the most published and cited nutrition scientists in the world. To be able to sit down with someone like that and then also kind of force them to explain things in a non-academic way is fun.
Yeah.
And that's when someone truly understands their topic, when they can explain it in a simple way.
Yeah.
And so I think my show, it's kind of just allowed me to pursue that curiosity.
I'm really fascinated by where the line is that you can cross with health, I guess. Where the line is that's too far. And what I mean by this is what I see. I've fallen into a certain hole. A lot of other people have fallen into deeper holes and more surface level holes than I have. But what happens is you start to embark on this health journey and you start learning more about health. And then you onboard something into your routine, into your diet, into your training, whatever it might be, a mindset or a mentality that you onboard and you want to live by, and you stick to it. And then one thing leads to another part in addition to your diet and another part to this thing. And you start going down this rabbit hole to the point where you are so disciplined and so strict on all of this criteria that I think it can really strip away the joy of your life. And so, like, for example, and I've explained this a couple of times, but I really want to get your thoughts on this because you're really deep in a rabbit hole of health. Like the mentality of like, if I don't follow through on this, I might let the demons in. And so going like, as an example, I used to do dead hangs at the end of my workout in the gym. And I would say that I'm doing 3 1-minute dead hangs. And no matter how much grip strength I did throughout the session, my hands could be half ripping off. But if I did one dead hang and I wanted to call it quits there, if I left the gym and only did 1 or 2 and didn't finish the 3, like I'm beating myself up about it.
Right. You carry your shame and guilt.
Yeah. Or it's like, Chris, like, why didn't you just finish that? Come on, man. You didn't follow through on the things you said you were going to do. And then I look at someone that isn't down this rabbit hole and they can leave the gym doing 1 dead hang, pleased, and move on with their day and go and chat some shit or watch a movie or whatever it is and have a little bit more joy in their life. And I kind of look at that and go, there's a level of nobility in that. What are your thoughts on how far you can go down this rabbit hole?
It's a fine line, but I think what you're talking about, I totally agree with, in that there's like over-optimization. Because when you over-optimize, you actually lose resilience and adaptability in a way.
Adaptability is the thing.
Right. So say you over-optimize your sleep to the point where you've got everything perfect, but then you go on the road and sleep in a hotel, you'll probably sleep far worse than the other person who hasn't been over-optimizing, finessing. They're a little bit more resilient. So there's a trade-off. But I think the metric to know where you're landing is in that shame and guilt bucket. How much of that are you feeling?
You know what is interesting about that topic too is it's masked with healthy as a title, so it's not considered bad.
Yeah, it's considered discipline.
Yeah, which is a fluff buzz term, which is a good thing. And so when people are anorexic, as an example, that's considered like quite unhealthy.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of the time, people go down a healthy rabbit hole where they're eating whole foods and satiating foods to keep them fuller so they can stay lean, but they end up looking pretty anorexic as well with a little bit of muscle. They probably feel the same, like skeleton-wise, like not really feeling like much, but it's not masked as bad like anorexic because they're being healthy and they're eating healthy foods.
There is a name for that though.
Yeah, what's it called?
Orthorexic.
Orthorexic, yes.
Yeah. And the indicator for that is, and again, I think it's a bit of a spectrum.
Yeah.
I think we've all probably been there at a stage.
Yeah.
I've been there.
Yeah, same.
It's, I guess by definition, orthorexia is undue, unnecessary focus on the purity and cleanliness of your diet, and it never feels good enough. It always has to be more pure, more clean. And because of that never-ending kind of reach for purity, you never feel like you're doing enough. You always feel lacking.
But isn't the result like similar to anorexia in a sense as well? That can be at times.
Yeah, well, it's smashing your self-esteem and self-love, right? So yeah, I think there are definitely overlaps in terms of the psychological impact. And that's me putting my hand up and saying, I'm not a psychologist, but I deal with orthorexia and even anorexia in that I'm providing nutrition advice. So I have to be careful about, there is a population out there who are at risk of that. And I think orthorexia hides behind fitness.
Yes.
And fitness is seen as, it's someone who is to be idolized, put on the pedestal, they're healthy, they have the six pack. But I think you make a good point that, sometimes that six pack is not reflective of the psychological experience that person's going through.
Yeah. It's not spoken about enough because it's masked with fitness, healthy six-pack muscles. But I've experienced it firsthand with some of my best friends when I was living in Bondi, and like you go down these rabbit holes, and I think what happens is you eliminate butter, then you eliminate all processed sugars, and then when Christmas comes around and there's brown sugar in the glazing on the ham, you can't eat it because it's got this level of this. And then like you just keep going down this rabbit hole to the point where it's like, okay, all I'm eating is ground beef and avocado and salt.
But I can also see how people land there because they're scrolling and you're exposed to all of these posts about what healthy eating looks like. And so you can kind of lose sight of the reality of the situation. And I think what would be helpful here is like for people to be able to pause and do a bit of a check. So are you feeling shame? Are you feeling guilt? Are you like, back to, we were talking earlier about like relationships. Is your eating behavior limiting your capacity to socialize with those people in your life where you can be yourself? These are all like kind of performance metrics that you can do a check-in and then maybe determine that, okay, maybe I am placing a little bit of undue, unnecessary focus on nutrition here. I could peel that back a little bit and I'm going to be happier.
So kind of doing an assessment of where your values are lying and your priorities in life in a sense, because health and fitness and being fit and healthy is extremely important. In fact, I would argue it's one of my highest values because you can have all the connection in the world, but if you're in a hospital bed, then what's the point? So it's important, but there's some line there because if you're taking it to a level that's at a cost and a sacrifice of connection with others, then maybe you've taken it too far.
All right, ultimately come back to, what are you optimizing for?
Yeah.
Are you optimizing for hypertrophy and a six pack, or are you optimizing for life fulfillment? Two very different things. Because if your answer is I'm optimizing for life fulfillment, but you're unhappy, you need to make some changes.
Yeah, fundamentally you're wrong and you're not anywhere near your goal.
I'm optimizing for life fulfillment. I want to squeeze the most out of life and get as much joy and introduce as much joy to people around me as possible. And so I use health as a vehicle for that because I think of like area under the curve. Every year, how much fulfillment can I get? And across a life, where there's more years, your area under the curve of life fulfillment is greater, right? So I make my decisions kind of based around that paradigm. And I think most people, when you drill down, even like Brian Johnson, his mantra is don't die. But I think, and I'm going to have a conversation with him soon, I think he's optimizing for life fulfillment. Because not dying is very different to saying I want to squeeze the most out of life.
Okay, this is interesting. I think we should unpack fulfillment then, because like this is another whole thing in itself. But let's unpack fulfillment, because how are you defining fulfillment? I look at Brian Johnson and like joy. Is there some joy? Like everything. I don't know. Everything's
it depends. It depends on his definition of fulfillment. What's fulfillment to him? Because if fulfillment to him is being a guinea pig and doing something that no one else has done and sort of paving the way and being a beacon of light in this longevity space, then he could create an argument that he has optimized for fulfillment in doing that. Yes. And no one can really question that. So I think everyone individually has to understand what's fulfilling to them. Right.
So you said before that you're optimizing for your life fulfillment. And what is there some key pillars in that fulfillment, and what are the things that you're focusing on? Hey, it is Monday morning, and you know what that means. It means I just received my Papa Macros delivery for the week, and Papa Macros has been an absolute game changer, and let me tell you why. I've just increased this show to 2 episodes every single week. So to put into context, we're releasing a cinema production with a new guest every 3 days, and I'm still training every single day and striving towards marathons and high rocks prep. So to stay on top of my health and fitness whilst fitting in this busy schedule that I have, Papa Macros has been a game changer for me, because it's allowing me to have nutritious, delicious, and more importantly, convenient meals at my doorstep every week, so I can stay on top of my health and also achieve all the goals that I'm striving towards. If you guys are time poor or you want to get on top of your health and fitness, Papa Macros is going to be a game changer for you as well. So you can go to the link in the description or the show notes below, or go to papamacros.com.au and you can use code Chris Griffin and you'll get 10% off for life on any Papa Macros order that you make. Once again, go to link in the description below and use code Chris Griffin for 10% off your entire order. Stay on top of your health and use Papa Macros today. Let's get right back to the show. You said before that you're optimizing for your life fulfillment. And what is there some key pillars in that fulfillment, and what are the things that you're focusing on?
Learning, inspiring people, memories and memory dividends. That's a big one, like experiences with the people that I love. So connection and understanding that those experiences it's at the moment's important, but you get a dividend. Like Bill Perkins says, you get a memory dividend.
What does that mean?
Memory dividend means can you tell me about a trip that you've been on the last 10 years? Does anything come to mind? A trip?
Yeah, a little trip over New Year's recently where we went and sat by a lake with no service, me and my best friend, for a week, and had a blast.
All right. And as you talk about this right now, you're reliving it. Yeah. I mean, there's probably a bunch of little stories all intertwined in there that you could riff on. And if your best friend was here, you guys could go, remember that, and go off and on. What's the feeling that you get when you do that?
It's quite euphoric.
Right? So the investment of time when you did that was not just about the fulfillment and the joy and the reward and everything that you got then and there. There's memory dividends. So every time you go and have an experience with loved ones, you bank that and you get joy and you get this release of neurotransmitters every time you relive it with those people. We've all experienced that.
Yes.
So for me, I mean, that's a big part of living a fulfilling life, is like how many really rich, fun, experiences, and some of them can be sad experiences as well. But like how many of these experiences where you are surrounded by people that you love and are everyone's feeling inspired, everyone's feeling connected, and you're creating things that you can talk about for years.
Memory dividend. That is so cool. And you said that it has to be, or not has to be, but you're mainly talking about experiences with others, loved ones. Do you feel like memory dividends are only formed with others, or are there solo memory dividends as well?
No, solace is, I mean, spending time by yourself for sure. It's another. I mean, you can learn about yourself through reflection. Like I can talk to you, and that's one of the great parts of relationships with other people is that they can reflect back to us. It's a growth opportunity for us, and they can hold us accountable. But also, you can learn a lot about yourself by being alone.
Yeah,
being quiet, and so I think you need a mix of both.
Yeah, learning the other people reflect you is massive. I love the quote. I don't know who it's from, but the quote: "People want to blame the mirror for what they see in it."
Yeah,
and so like the mirror's offering a reflection of yourself, yet you blame the thing itself, the person, the experience, the moment, whatever it is, and that's really interesting because yes, these people reflect you, but you can only realize that if you're willing to actually see it and take ownership, or you can live in a victim mindset where it is the mirror's fault.
Right, and it brings us back to curiosity because you can be defensive. It's the mirror's fault, or you can be curious about what it's reflecting. And it's funny because I'm curious. I talk about curiosity of the world, but that curiosity of what's being reflected is that's challenging. I think it's challenging for everyone.
I sometimes wonder if like being self-reflective, too self-reflective and too curious can just make me lack a bit more peace of mind in my life. Do you ever feel like that? Being like overthinking, curious, always wanting to unpack and find an answer can maybe result in a lack of peace of mind?
It's a balance, right? Because Rich Roll always says mood follows action. So if you find yourself just always reflecting, you're not kind of doing, you have to be doing, right, to change the trajectory. So like self-reflection is important to the point where it gets the cogs turning. So I mean that's how I think about it. It would be if you're just self-reflecting for the purpose of self-reflecting and you're not kind of using it to get some forward momentum and change patterns and course correct, then it might be time to focus more on the action side of things and less on the reflection.
Yeah, using reflection as a tool for procrastination in a sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you can feel like you're doing the work just by self-reflecting and then procrastinating. But the work, that's the information that informs the doing. You have to do the doing, right? And so, I mean, that's the calculation. It's like the awareness piece, understanding the things that you're doing well, the things that maybe you're not doing that well, getting feedback from others, and then being able to take all that on board and not just being kind of paralyzed by that information. Because sometimes if you get too much, it's like paralysis by analysis and you just status quo stays there. You're just kind of treading water. How can you take on some of that information and then actually use it to do more?
It's kind of where that humility piece needs to come into play too, like we spoke about earlier at the start of the conversation around like having humility and being able to change your beliefs when new information gets presented to you, I guess. Would you say in your line of work where you're, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but a big part of it is you're learning these beliefs and forming these beliefs, and then you're then teaching them or sharing them online as well. So you've got this level of going, I'm being curious and I'm unpacking things and letting my curiosity guide me that way. I'm then forming an opinion based on the science and all the rest of it. And then I'm then delivering that to other people. But then you might learn something new and then you have to change it, but you've just put this out to the audience. And so.
But that's why I try to. So, for example, I just did an episode on apple cider vinegar. And, we all know apple cider vinegar has been, in the wellness kind of arena for the last decade, there's been a lot of claims made on it. Well, what is well supported and what's not? I did a huge deep dive on that. And there's probably like 8 or 10 main claims that you'd see online about apple cider vinegar. And some people might make it out that it's like a cure-all for everything. And then others have a kind of more tempered approach to those claims. But the episode, I deep dived the literature, and I'm not just saying to people, okay, apple cider vinegar does this, this, and this. I'm walking them through the process of looking at the literature. Again, it comes back to I'm trying as best as possible to show people how I'm thinking, right? Because if I'm showing people how I'm thinking in the process I'm going through in terms of reviewing the science, then again, when I change my mind, it makes sense, right? Because I've explained my thought process.
Does that make you feel, this makes a lot of sense, that surely that's probably a mechanism that you use as well to feel less of an imposter too? Because then when you explain all of the things and your thought behind it, if people judge you as to why you're saying a certain thing, or you're not good enough to be saying that thing and all those limiting beliefs, you can then look back at the evidence and go, well, this is exactly how I formed that opinion in the first place.
Right. And I kind of create an environment where they're less likely to critique me, and they're going to critique the thought process, which is what I want. Like as someone who is I just have such a passion for science, and I see science as such a, it's the only real tool that we have to better understand the world. It's the best tool that we have to better understand the natural world that we live in. So I have so much respect for it, and I want that feedback from people. I don't want to just say, hey, drink apple cider vinegar and it's going to stop a blood glucose spike. Because that can be taken out of context. Like, I want to show people the literature and provide a very nuanced piece of advice and recommendation based on that. And then you might come back and say, you know what? I listened to what you had to say about that, and here's why I don't agree with it. And provide citations or like point out the studies that I've put forward, the problems with them. And now we're having a scientific discussion, right? Rather than if I just...
And that's practical.
Yeah, it's practical. It's like productive for that person and myself. And to be frank, that rarely happens in the comments on Instagram and YouTube. It happens, for me at least, it's on email, it's phone calls. So like academics will call me, scientists will call me and discuss an episode or videos that I put out. And, often there will be someone who will say, hey, I heard you reviewing this paper. Have you thought about this? Or maybe they present something else, and I have changed my mind on things because of that over time.
Yeah, it's fascinating, the thought behind how you're delivering the message. So you have this whole explanation on why you've come to the conclusion that you've come to, in a sense. And you're doing that for a few reasons, as you just explained. Obviously, you're like helping them understand your thought process so that then it can validate and probably validate and influence them on agreeing in a sense too. Because they go, oh yeah, I can see how he thought about all of this, and gives them more conviction that what you're saying is probably true. But then it's also a coping mechanism to receive less hate because you've explained yourself as well. Because if you just come out and claim or make the thing.
Well, if I just come out and claim, what I'm doing is I'm people kind of, in my view, they follow what people are doing, not what they're saying, right? So if I'm just coming out and making a claim, I can guarantee you the comment section is just full of people saying it's bullshit and then making another claim. But because I'm stepping through the process, when anyone comments, they kind of understand that they're going to have to present some evidence.
It's going to be an essay.
Right, they're going to have to. Or if they don't, I'll comment in a way where I'm not really engaging with what they're saying. I'm asking them to present evidence using the framework that I've just gone through, and then you never hear from these people.
Yes.
Or rarely. Like sometimes, to be honest, sometimes you might, but it's rare. Like usually when you push back on someone who's like, this is BS, and you kind of say, oh, is it? Like, can you tell me what part of my thought process and logic is not right here? Can you provide some evidence? I'm happy to review it. And more than 9 times out of 10, they don't write back.
It makes so much sense. I really like it. You do make some quite like you present other people online and review their thoughts and kind of debunk them a lot and share your own opinions and kind of to some degree just like disagree with a lot of people online, and you talk about it publicly in your content. What makes you want to do that? Do these other people kind of annoy you with their way they make their claims, or what's your thought process behind debunking other people?
So firstly, if people are not familiar with the nature of how I do that, I never go down the the track of ad hominem attacks. So nothing I will say is personal.
Yeah.
I'm never coming after Chris personally. I'm going to say anything related to him as a person. I'm only going to speak to the science, and I'm rarely, if at all, going to speculate even on what their intent is. And if I did, I'll say this is pure speculation. I'm going to speak to their scientific thought process and why I disagree with it. Why do I do it? Probably a part of my ego wants to be right, but let's just put that on the table. Put that on the table. No, well, I honestly think that the main, there's definitely always an ego thing, like to kind of, I need to set the record straight here. But to be honest, there are a lot of times where I'm like, I'm just going to leave this. There are other people that do this that really enjoy it. I don't enjoy doing that part of my work that much. I'd much rather have these conversations on email and private phone calls with people, but sometimes they just keep regurgitating the information, and they're doing it to such huge communities. And at the very top of my value of my podcast is protect the listener. So if I'm getting sponsorship deals or whatever, like the number one value for me is protect the listener. And so when my community is sending me these things, these reels that people keep posting, and I just keep getting it over and over and over, sometimes it just gets to a point where I'm like, okay, I'm going to do an episode on this. And I did one recently. But I don't do it that often. It's not like daily content for me. There are people that's all they do every single day. I might do that like once a month or so. And those videos for me are usually the best. If I did those videos and that's all I did, like I know that my account would blow up 10 times more, but it's a little bit stressful doing those videos, because even when you are just focusing on the science, like it kind of comes across as like attacking someone, and it comes across as personal even when you're really trying to make it not personal. And you know that what you're doing is you're opening up a comment section to a fight. That doesn't feel good for the person. For me, it doesn't feel good for me to create content where then other people fighting each other. There's something about that that's very negative and weighs on you over time. So although I do dip my toes into that kind of debunking world, it's not my primary way of communicating.
It makes sense. It also creates a level of just tension between other people in the space as well. And I guess that's probably not something you want to have.
It's a little, there's something a little bit yuck about it to me. And almost always, if I have done it, I've invited that person for a conversation first. So I'm not just out there like kind of plucking someone and trying to take them down. I'd rather have a conversation with these people. But quite often they're not happy to have the conversation, and they just keep posting the same thing. And so I feel some degree of responsibility because people are sending it to me over and over and over, and I'm confused. And so my goal is like, okay, can I put out a piece of content that refers to what this person's putting out, provide a bit more nuance and context and science that explains why I might not disagree with it. Or maybe there's parts of their message I do agree with, but then there's parts where I think they've left out key context. And then the goal of that is so that Chris or whoever's like listening to my video just has more information to make a more educated decision.
There's a lot of people that kind of, at least for me, and I've resonated with a lot of people talking about the phases of life that someone's in. And so like obviously people will have their like growth phases, and there may be a phase where they're prioritizing more family or trying to grow connection in their life or whatever it might be. And typically people in their 20s and 30s and stuff are really trying to grow. Do you look at your life in phases at all? And would you say you have an idea on what phase of life you're in?
I'm in the relationship and life fulfillment phase for sure. I think I've kind of structured my life as much as I can now to go back to what we spoke about earlier, to optimize for fulfillment. Whereas in my 20s, I was, there's an opportunity cost to really, getting ahead from a financial point of view and commercial success. And I was lucky to have that. And so I have mixed feelings because, often you'll see these messages from people about just making sure you have like enough balance in your life and, not overworking. And I look back at my 20s and I worked incredibly hard. beat myself up. But it got me into a position where I am today. So had I not done that, I don't know where I would be today. I'm an N equals 1. It's not a controlled study. We don't have the sliding doors moment to see where Simon ended up if I had been less disciplined and had less of a work ethic in my 20s. So I find myself today in my late 30s where, the commercial elements of my life are still important. And, even running a podcast, it costs money. You have to make it work from a commercial sense. So I still think about those things, but that's not my driver. My driver is not right now to become the number one podcast in the world and get to a certain amount of revenue. I have it at a level where I can maintain it. It's profitable, fuels my lifestyle, and I can focus on my relationships and all the things that wake surfing and skydiving and stuff that I just love doing. And each to their own. I have other people who are just head down on their podcast and they're smashing it. They're even doing 3 episodes a week. They're building a great business. And I have so much respect for them because I've been there, that in my 20s doing that sort of stuff. So I agree with you. I think there's different phases, and you can't really say there's one right way.
It's defining the fulfillment piece again, right? Mm-hmm. How are you defining life fulfillment? Because if someone's true, Elon Musk, what's his life fulfillment, right? And Brian Johnson, what's his life fulfillment, and being able to optimize for that. And you mentioned there as well being beating yourself up in your 20s. Yeah, I don't really agree with the balance piece either, especially when you're trying to build something. Like when you're really trying to build, there's an element of all-inness that I think kind of you need to do in a sense.
Yeah. There's grit. It's hard. People need to know that so that they understand realistically, to have a degree of commercial success, it requires devotion. You're all in. You're all in. And if you're kind of half in, half out, someone else is going to beat you.
Yeah. And then again, tying onto that is when you recognize that if you're all in, because you need to be all in because everyone else trying to achieve the same things all in as well. When you feel emotions of sadness, when you feel lonely, when you feel tired, and when you feel frustrated and impatient and all the rest of it, good. That's all part of it. That is literally what makes the light at the other end worthwhile. Because if you had none of those emotions, then everyone would achieve it. Nothing would be valuable. Right. And so being able to onboard those feelings, knowing that that's just a cost to going all in, you can kind of go through them a bit easier.
You can accept the trade-off.
Yeah.
A little bit. But I think it's nice to be aware of those things. I would say back in my 20s, times changed a lot with the explosion of the internet and the information that's out there. I wasn't even aware of that stuff.
Yeah.
So I wonder now if I was, in my 20s and kind of all in like I was, I probably would have paid attention to some of the things I could have done to better look after myself a little bit while staying all in.
Yeah. I guess it's just you're basing your decisions based on the information that you know about life. And if you didn't have that information and the social media wasn't as prominent when you were in your 20s, then that was just what your reality was, I guess.
Right.
Yeah. Is there anything in terms of in your life now, mentioned late 30s, going back and forth and spending most of your time in LA and then obviously back in Australia and Byron, you've got the things that are booming. What would you say is there any challenges that you've got in your life now that you're kind of trying to overcome on this phase of your life now, having done a lot of that commercial success and then really trying to focus on family fulfillment? Is there any challenges that you're maybe coming across that you think?
Every day.
Yeah.
Being a better partner, being a better son, being a better friend, the list is kind of endless in that capacity. But in terms of where I'm at in my life and chapter and things I'm focusing on, I want to have family, I want to have kids, and I see that in the next 10 years being a big part of my life and being able to devote myself to my kids. And so with that foresight, it just is giving me even more motivation to kind of work on myself so that they they see me and the way that I do life, and I'm modeling something to them which helps them become a good human.
And when you say being a better son,
Mm.
what does that mean to you?
I mean, fundamentally, it's showing up for your parents. It's making sure that they know how much you love them and they can feel that. Listening, hearing, understanding. Everyone just wants to be understood. So it's the same elements that make up any healthy relationship. I mean, I think for me, through my life, sometimes you can fall into this trap of just thinking your parents are going to be around forever. And so where I am now, my parents are kind of nearly 70. And when you run the maths on, my dad lives in America in a different state to me, my mum's in Melbourne, and you run the maths on how many times are you actually going to see them for the remainder of their life, that's a pretty daunting calculation. And it just makes you want to kind of shuffle things around in your life so you spend more time with them.
Yeah. Do you feel like the older you get, the more respect you have for your parents?
Oh, massively. Yeah. Yeah. And even just thinking about me having kids, that just all of a sudden, it as you get older, you're better at putting yourself in your parents' shoes. And then you can understand the decisions that they made that maybe before you blamed them for.
Yeah, blamed them. Do you feel like you went through periods of your life where you maybe resented your parents more than you should have?
I've always had a lot of deep appreciation and love for my parents and felt connected and felt love despite the fact that there was a divorce and, my dad was living in America for part of my adolescence. But I probably did carry some level of resentment around a family that had broken up and not having the same kind of upbringing as my friends and the experiences that they were having, and feeling like our family was different. It was broken. Broken. Think about the word of broken. That brings a pretty negative kind of feeling to it. But when I look back now, I'm much better able to see the positives that came out of it, better understand their situation and the decisions that they made, and the way that they protected my brother and I as well.
Yeah, it's cool. I just want to commend you. Thank you so much for all you're doing. It's so inspiring, especially seeing how long you've been sticking at your podcast and growing that and all the amazing things you're doing. We'll definitely have to connect to them wherever in the States. But is there anything you want to say before we wrap up?
Mate, the feelings are mutual. I remember the first time I saw your show when you recorded it at Waves, and I think I said at the start, you should be really proud of the conversations you're having and the impact that you're having. And I'm excited to see you go over to the States and in Austin or wherever it is, and watch your journey over the next couple of years. I think it's going to be really exciting.
That'd be awesome, man. Thank you so much. I appreciate you coming on the show. And if you guys made it to the end, then screenshot this and tag Simon and I on socials. I'll leave all of Simon's details in the show notes and the description below, so you can go and check all of his stuff out for yourself. And yeah, tag us on your Instagram story so we can show our appreciation for you guys for tuning into the end, and leave us a 5-star review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, because it helps the show grow and helps us keep getting awesome people just like Simon back on the show so we can keep on growing together. Going to sign out for this week. No, we're not. We're doing 2 episodes a week now. So we're not signing out for this week, but I'll see you guys very, very soon.
Thanks, mate.
See you later, Simon. Thank you.